At my grandmother's memorial, I found my 24-year-old sister sitting on the floor of a locked pantry while 40 people ate lemon cake in the next room. The strange part wasn't that Willa was hiding from the crowd. Crowds had always hurt her. Too many voices, too much perfume, silverware striking plates, people touching her shoulder without warning. The strange part was the steel slide bolt on the hallway side of the door. The stranger part was the dishwasher running empty. I know it was empty because I opened it later. No plates, no cups, just hot water hissing against bare metal, loud enough to bury the soft rhythm Willa was making with her fingertips against the pantry wall. I was 35 then, an emergency room nurse in Pittsburgh, and I had spent 11 years learning that the first story a room tells you is rarely the whole story. A man says he fell, but the bruise has a handprint. A parent says a child is clumsy, but the X-rays disagree. A patient says she is fine because the person who hurt her is standing 6 feet away. My family had spent my entire life standing 6 feet away from the truth. I crouched beside the pantry door and tapped 3 times with my fingernail. Quick, slow, quick. The sound inside stopped. Then 3 taps answered me. That little pattern was something Willa and I had made up when we were children. It meant, I know you're there. I slid the bolt back. When the door opened, she blinked at the light. She was thinner than I remembered from the few photographs relatives had posted online. Her dark blonde hair had been cut unevenly at her jaw. She wore noise-reducing headphones and held a spiral notebook against her chest. There was a folded blanket beneath her, a bottle of water, and a plastic bin of colored pencils arranged from palest to darkest. For 1 second, relief hit me so hard I nearly cried. Willa was alive. She knew me. I had found her. Then my mother's voice came from behind me. Brooke, don't. Not hello. Not you came. Not your sister has missed you. Don't. I turned. Denise Harlan stood at the end of the hallway in a charcoal dress, still wearing the pearl brooch she had worn beside my grandmother's casket. Behind her, my father, Martin, looked less surprised than irritated. She went in there on her own, my mother said quietly. You know how overwhelmed she gets. I looked at the bolt. My father followed my eyes and exhaled through his nose. It's for safety. She wanders when she's upset. Willa's fingers tightened around the notebook. I had heard versions of that sentence since I was 13. I grew up in Ashford, Pennsylvania, a town where people knew which family you belonged to before they knew what kind of person you were. Harlan Garden and Feed sat at the corner of Alder Street and Route 18 with green awnings, hand-painted signs, and my grandfather's name still burned into a wooden plaque behind the counter. My father inherited the business. My mother inherited the job of making sure everyone admired us. We were the family that donated mulch to the high school garden, the family that sponsored Little League jerseys, the family that brought casseroles before anyone asked. And then there was Willa. She was born when I was 11. Before she could talk, she sorted refrigerator magnets by shape. She loved weather maps, ceiling fans, and moths. At 5, after months of evaluations, a developmental pediatrician told my parents that Willa was autistic and would probably need significant communication support. My mother's first concern was whether the school district would label her permanently. My father's was whether customers would hear about it. They rejected the special education placement. They stopped taking her to the developmental clinic after a year. They told neighbors that Willa had an immune disorder and was being educated at home. A retired teacher came twice a week. Speech therapy lasted 3 months. Occupational therapy lasted 6 weeks. What lasted was the room. It began as a cedar storage room off the downstairs hall, barely bigger than a walk-in closet. My mother put a beanbag chair inside, a soft lamp, picture books, and a heavy curtain over the tiny window. At first, Willa did use it voluntarily when the house got loud. She would take my hand, pull me toward it, and shut the door almost all the way. Then my parents hosted a spring fundraiser when Willa was 6. I watched my father install a slide bolt outside the door that afternoon. "It's only during company," he told me. That is one of the lies adults tell children when they want obedience without questions. Only tonight. Only until things settle down. Only because she doesn't understand. By the time I was 17, only during company had become whenever Willa cried, resisted a haircut, refused food she couldn't tolerate, knocked over something in a panic, or embarrassed my mother in front of someone whose opinion mattered. I hated it. I also I participated in it by staying quiet. That is the hardest part to admit. It was not enough. The night I finally challenged them, I was 19. My parents had invited business owners and church friends over for an anniversary dinner. Willa was 8. Someone dropped a serving dish. She screamed, and my mother marched her to the cedar room. An hour later, I found the bolt closed. I opened it. My father closed it again. I opened it again. He grabbed my wrist. I jerked free and shoved him. He stumbled backward into a glass display cabinet and needed 12 stitches in his shoulder. The police came. He told them I had attacked him during a family gathering. Technically, I had put my hands on him first in front of witnesses who had not seen what happened in the hallway. My parents' attorney arranged a plea to disorderly conduct and simple assault. My mother told me fighting the charge would drag Willa through public humiliation. So I signed. A week later, I left Ashford with 2 duffel bags, $600, and more certainty than wisdom. I promised Willa I would come back when I could take her somewhere safe. Then life did the brutal thing life often does. It became complicated enough to make cowardice look practical. I completed nursing school. I worked nights. I paid off debt. I sent birthday cards and packages, then started receiving them back unopened. My mother changed the home number. My father sent a certified letter warning me not to contact Willa directly because my behavior caused her severe distress. I became good at being useful to strangers because strangers did not know the part of me that had failed my sister. Then my grandmother Margaret died at 87. She had never been brave enough to oppose my parents openly, but she had been the only relative who still sent me Christmas cards. Her attorney, Elliot Crane, called me personally and said she had left written instructions that I be notified of the memorial whether my parents liked it or not. So I drove to Ashford for the first time in 12 years. At the service, my parents sat in the front pew with my father's older sister, Celeste Rowe, and Celeste's husband, Frank. Willa was absent. Afterward, everyone went back to my parents' house. That was when Elliot Crane found me beside the coat closet and asked if we could speak privately. My grandmother had created a supplemental needs trust for Willa. $312,000, funded through investments and the sale of a small parcel of land. Celeste had been named temporary trustee pending a probate review. I remember staring at him. Grandma had that kind of money. She had that kind of guilt, he said, then immediately looked as if he regretted the phrasing. I asked what he meant. He hesitated. When she signed the trust, she told me, "Make sure this buys her choices." I asked what choices. She said I would understand if the family ever fought over the money. Before I could press him, I heard the dishwasher. And then I found Willa behind the pantry door. The cedar room from our childhood had been remodeled years earlier. The pantry was new. The bolt was new. The method was not. I took photographs before anyone could stop me. The closed bolt, the door, the empty dishwasher, the blanket on the floor. My hands were steady. My stomach was not. My first instinct was to take Willa's hand, put her in my car, and drive west until Ashford was small in the mirror. My father knew me well enough to anticipate it. He went into his office and returned with a blue folder. Willa had been declared incapacitated shortly after her 18th birthday. My parents were her court-appointed co-guardians. The papers were 4 years old. I had never known there had been a hearing. "You remove her from this house without permission," my father said, "and you will be violating a guardianship order." My mother added, "Please don't turn this into another incident." Another incident. 12 years collapsed into 2 words. I looked at Willa. She had moved to the dining room threshold, but would not enter the crowded room. I wanted her to look at me and give me permission to ignore every law between us. Instead, she pressed 2 fingers to her notebook and tapped our pattern. "Quick, slow, quick." I answered on the wooden door frame. Then I left without her. I cried so hard in the parking lot of a closed pharmacy that I threw up. The next morning, I called Adult Protective Services, the county probate court, and Elliot Crane. I sent photographs. I wrote down dates. I requested copies of the guardianship file. I learned that the hearing notice had gone to relatives listed by my parents. I was not listed. The first welfare visit accomplished almost nothing. By the time the caseworker, Janice Patel, arrived, the pantry contained canned tomatoes and paper towels. The bolt had been removed. My mother explained that it had been installed temporarily because the LD door drifted open. Willa sat at the kitchen table in a new sweater, working on a puzzle while my father answered questions for her. Janice called me afterward. "I can't substantiate confinement from what I saw today," she said. I gripped the phone until my fingers hurt. "I have photographs." "I have them too." "That door locked from the outside." "I know what your photograph shows." It was the first time an official had said something that did not sound like a polite way of calling me hysterical. Janice continued, "I also found no current primary care provider in the records they gave me, no recent dental care, and no documented communication assessment since adolescence. I'm requesting a guardianship review." That changed everything, though not quickly. The probate judge ordered an independent evaluation by a clinician selected from the court roster. My parents could not choose the person, cancel the appointment, or sit in for the whole interview. Dr. Simone Keller ran an adult developmental medicine practice outside Erie. She was direct in a way my family hated. She spoke to Willa before speaking to anyone else. She asked permission before touching her. She dimmed the fluorescent lights without making a production of it. Most importantly, she brought an augmentative communication device. Willa had used picture boards as a child, but my parents had abandoned them because, as my mother once said, we don't want her dependent on props. Dr. Keller placed a tablet on the table with a simple keyboard and category icons. For several minutes, Willa only traced the edge of the case. Then she typed one word. BROK. I had not been allowed in the room. I learned about it from the report. I read that page, sitting on the floor beside my apartment couch. The report documented untreated dental problems, substantial weight loss compared with old records, loss of skills that had once been present, and a complete absence of meaningful communication support. Dr. Keller wrote that Willa showed consistent evidence of understanding more language than her caregivers assumed, and that failure to provide an accessible means of communication had limited her ability to participate in decisions about her own life. I called Elliot and asked the question I should have known better than to ask. So the judge removes them and gives her to me. Brooke, he said, people are not given to other people. The correction stung because I needed it. He went on. Your parents may be removed. That does not make you the automatic replacement. The court will look at your history, your housing, your work schedule, your relationship with Willa, and alternatives that restrict her rights less. My family found a cleaner exit. On the morning of the review, my parents resigned as guardians, citing age, stress, and my father's blood pressure problems. By resigning before a contested finding, they avoided a formal ruling that they had neglected Willa. Then Celeste filed to replace them. My aunt had a 4-bedroom farmhouse 10 minutes outside Ashford, a retired husband, decades of community references, and no criminal record. She and Frank also owned Pine Hollow Cottages, a small roadside property with 9 rental units near the lake. I had a 1-bedroom apartment in Pittsburgh and 3 12-hour night shifts each week in an emergency department. My old assault case was read into the record. So were 12 years of absence. Celeste's attorney, Damon Pierce, never raised his voice. He did not have to. He asked sensible questions in a sensible tone. Who would stay with Willa while I slept after night shift? How would I transport her to appointments 2 hours away? Why had I waited so long to return? Why had I never petitioned a court before my grandmother's money existed? That last question landed exactly where he aimed it. I wanted to shout that I had not even known about the trust. Instead, I answered, because I was afraid, and because I kept telling myself I would do it when I was stronger. Judge Rebecca Sloan studied me for a long time. I lost. Celeste became temporary guardian of Willa's person and trustee of the Supplemental Needs Fund, with scheduled visitation for me and a 6-month review. On the courthouse steps, my aunt touched my elbow. You should be relieved, she said. She stays close to everything familiar. I asked, will you let her keep the tablet? Her mouth tightened almost invisibly. We'll do what's appropriate. That was the first warning. The second came during my first visit. Then I saw the daily schedule taped beside her bed. It was not a schedule, it was a work list. Strip guest beds, fold towels, wipe tables, sweep unit 3, sort laundry. Pine Hollow Cottages was on the same property, down a gravel path behind the farmhouse. When I asked Celeste about it, she smiled. Routine is good for her. Is she being paid? For helping family. Willa was standing 3 feet away. Celeste spoke as if she were furniture. I turned to my sister. Do you like helping at the cottages? Willa looked toward the kitchen. Her tablet was not in the room. Celeste noticed me notice. We're limiting it. She gets obsessive. 3 days later, Teresa Grant called me. Teresa managed New Roads, an adult day and community support program Dr. Keller had recommended. Willa had attended for less than a month. Celeste had withdrawn her. The reason on the form was cost containment. The trust had more than $300,000. The next week, Celeste transferred Willa's medical care from Dr. Keller's clinic to a telemedicine provider. Then my visits were cut from 4 hours to 90 minutes. Teresa said something that stayed with me. When support disappears one piece at a time, each piece can look reasonable. You have to look at the direction. The direction was isolation. Elliot requested a formal accounting of the trust. Celeste filed 1 page. Judge Sloan ordered documentation. While we waited, I kept visiting. On my 4th visit, the tablet was gone completely. Celeste said Willa had thrown it. Willa stared at her. I asked where the damaged device was. Disposed of. Did anyone document the damage? Before I left, I held my palm on the kitchen table and tapped quick, slow, quick. Willa did not respond at first. Then, as Celeste turned toward the sink, Willa reached out and pressed 3 fingertips to my wrist in the same rhythm. I drove home with my jaw clenched, so hard it ached. Dr. Keller helped us solve the tablet problem in a way my aunt did not expect. The telemedicine service Celeste had chosen required a communication access plan for patients who could not reliably use speech. Dr. Keller documented that Willa's AAC device was medically necessary for informed participation. A replacement device was issued, and Teresa restored Willa's old layout. I watched Willa turn it on. Her fingers moved hesitantly through the familiar icons. Then she opened a blank button and typed a sentence none of us had programmed. Let me answer. She chose a dark blue background and placed the button on the first screen. Teresa swallowed hard. Celeste's face changed for half a second. It's not anger. Fear. I did not understand why until later. The detailed trust accounting arrived 2 weeks after that. It was 46 pages of receipts, checks, credit card statements, and explanations. The explanations were polished. The numbers were not. Celeste had paid herself monthly, caregiving stipends, far above the amount approved in the trust plan. She had used trust money to replace the roof on 2 rental cottages, claiming Willa benefited from safe family property. She had purchased a used SUV titled to Frank and categorized it as accessible transportation, even though Willa did not drive, and the vehicle was used for hauling linens and cleaning supplies. In 10 months, more than $82,000 had left Willa's trust. Elliot did not call it theft. Lawyers are careful with nouns before prosecutors choose them. He called it a pattern of expenditures requiring judicial review. Celeste responded by attacking my visits. She submitted a behavior log showing Willa had slept poorly, refused chores, and become agitated after seeing me. She recommended supervised contact because I was destabilizing the ward's routine. Judge Sloan temporarily shortened my visits pending the hearing. Then Celeste canceled 2 of them. Then all of them. Then Frank called me from a blocked number. He spoke so quietly, I could barely hear him. Willa isn't at the farmhouse. My stomach dropped. Where is she? One of the cottages, number 9. Celeste says the house is being treated for mold. Is it? Silence. Frank. No. I stood up from the break room table. Does the court know? No. Does APS know? I don't think so. Is the door locked? He breathed in. Celeste keeps the deadbolt key. The call ended. I reported it immediately. Janice Patel told me she could request an urgent welfare check, but the address on the guardianship file was still the farmhouse. An investigator went there that afternoon. Celeste said Willa was visiting family. The investigator documented that Willa could not be seen and scheduled follow-up. 3 days. 72 hours. In emergency medicine, 72 hours is not a delay. It is a different universe. The next thread came from Dr. Keller. She had obtained medication records through the guardianship review. A sedating antipsychotic had been started by the telemedicine provider shortly after Celeste took over. The dose had increased twice. There was almost no clinical documentation explaining why. Celeste's behavior logs described agitation and noncompliance. The refill history described convenience. Dr. Keller filed her own mandated report and insisted the telemedicine service require an in-person examination before another refill. The system had finally begun to close in. Then my mother came to my apartment after my shift carrying a bakery box. She set it on my counter. Drop the accounting complaint. Celeste made mistakes. She has cared for Willa every day while you were gone for 12 years. She moved her into a rental unit and locked the door. Your aunt is scared. So is Willa. You keep making everything about individual feelings, Brooke. Families survive because somebody makes hard decisions. I asked, did you know about the medication? Instead, she said, you think this began with Willa. Ask Elliot why your grandmother created that trust. Ask him what happened to June. Then she picked up her purse and left without the bakery box. At 5:17 the next morning, my charge nurse called my name across the emergency department. Brooke, do you have a sister named Willa? I was halfway through drawing blood from a patient. Every part of me went cold. An ambulance had brought in a young woman, found outside Pine Hollow cottages. I handed my patient to another nurse, told the charge nurse I had a conflict, and walked toward the trauma bays on legs that did not feel attached to me. Willa was on a stretcher under warm blankets. Her hair was damp with sweat. Her lips were dry and cracked. She had abrasions on both knees and a deep scrape along one forearm. She kept blinking slowly, fighting sedation. A maintenance worker from a gas station across the road had found her beside a drainage ditch at dawn. She had climbed out through the bathroom window of Cottage 9. The window screen had been pushed outward. The cottage door had a keyed deadbolt that could not be opened from inside without a key, because the interior thumb turn had been replaced after a break-in months earlier. Celeste had kept the key. Willa had escaped through the window. And tucked under her sweatshirt, held so tightly the corner had cut a red line into her skin, was the replacement tablet. I stood outside the bay while another nurse treated my sister because I was family, not staff, and for once I was grateful for a rule that told me exactly where to stand. Labs showed dehydration. Her medication level was far higher than expected. She had lost 11 pounds since Dr. Keller's evaluation. The physician documented pressure marks around one wrist and bruising in different stages of healing. APS arrived before breakfast. Celeste arrived shortly after, carrying guardianship papers and demanding discharge. The attending physician refused. He simply said Willa was not medically cleared, and discharge to the prior environment would be unsafe pending investigation. When I was finally allowed into the room as a sister, Willa was awake. I did not touch her until she reached for me. Then I held out my hand and tapped the old rhythm against my own palm. She copied it. She pressed the blue button she had made at the library. Let me answer. Stay. That afternoon, Elliot filed an emergency petition to suspend Celeste as guardian and trustee. The court appointed an independent temporary guardian while the investigation continued. My mother came to the hospital that evening. Security would not let her onto the unit. She saw me through the glass doors and said, "You've destroyed us." I almost argued. Instead, I looked at Willa's room behind me and realized there was nothing left to defend. 2 days later, Elliot asked me to come to his office. An archival box sat on the conference table. My grandmother had left it sealed with instructions to open it if anyone challenged Willa's trust or tried to restrict its use for her care. Inside were old photographs, letters, and institutional records. The first photograph showed my father at 9, Celeste at 12, and a smaller girl between them in a gingham dress. The girl had one hand lifted near her face and was looking away from the camera. On the back, my grandmother had written 3 names. Martin, Celeste, June. The record said she was admitted to the Laurel Ridge Training School at 7 after being described as unmanageable at home. The language was decades old, clinical and cruel. There were references to developmental delay, repetitive movements, limited speech, and socially inappropriate distress. There were receipts from the institution. Then letters. My grandmother wrote every month for the first year. At first she asked when June could come home. Later she asked whether visits were advisable. The institution repeatedly suggested that family visits interfered with adjustment. The letters became less frequent. Then they stopped. June died at 11 during a respiratory outbreak. There had been no funeral in Ashford. Her remains were buried on the institution grounds under a numbered marker. My grandmother's final, handwritten note was newer than everything else. I read it 3 times. I hid one child because I was ashamed and afraid. I watched the family learn the wrong lesson from what happened to her. If they try to hide Willa too, use this money to give her people outside us. I sat down. Suddenly, Celeste's fear at the library made sense. Willa's button, "Let me answer," had not frightened my aunt because it challenged control in the present. It had opened a door to the past. Celeste had been 12 when June disappeared from the family. She had spent more than 50 years turning that disappearance into a philosophy. I asked Elliot if Celeste knew about the box. "Not its contents," he said. "Your grandmother told me Celeste would know enough." I took a copy of June's photograph and went back to the hospital. Celeste had been denied visitation, but she was waiting in the lobby to speak with her attorney. I asked if she would sit with me in the empty cafeteria. Then I placed the photograph on the table. Not softened, collapsed. "Our sister." Eventually she spoke. June had screamed when clothing seams hurt. She had bolted from rooms. She repeated phrases for hours. She sometimes bit her own hand until it bled. The family doctor told my grandparents there was a state school with trained staff. 3 years later, a letter announced June was dead. My mother never recovered. I think you decided the lesson was that outsiders are dangerous. And then you locked Willa in a cottage. I kept her from being taken into a facility. You used her trust to repair your business. I was supposed to protect her, she said. I wasn't going to fail again. I answered, "You did fail again. You just changed the building." Celeste walked out. The next morning, her attorney offered a settlement. Celeste would resign as guardian and trustee. My parents would support my petition. Willa could move in with me as soon as medically appropriate. In return, the trust accounting would be resolved confidentially. No family member would provide records voluntarily to prosecutors. The parties would issue a statement calling the dispute a misunderstanding caused by stress and differing care philosophies. "You have to understand the alternative," he said. "A contested hearing can still end with a professional guardian. The court may decide the entire family is too conflicted. You have a record. You were absent for years. You work nights. There is no guaranteed outcome." Dr. Keller and the hospital speech therapist helped make a visual explanation on her tablet. "Move with Brooke soon if agreement. Court hearing if no agreement. Court has uncertainty. Records public to investigators if no agreement." I told her, "I want you with me. I also don't want to decide this around you." Willa read the screen for a long time. Then she typed, "June." I had shown her the photograph the night before. "Yes." Another pause. Then, "Tell." One word. The first decision my family had ever asked Willa to make about a family secret. She chose daylight. So I rejected the deal. And then I had to build a life that made rejecting it responsible. I left the emergency department for a daytime position at a community health clinic. The pay was lower. I hated giving up acute care more than I expected. Emergency nursing had become the place where I trusted myself most. Teresa walked through it with me and pointed out things I had missed. The buzzing kitchen light, the dryer alarm that could not be muted, the bedroom facing a busy intersection. We changed what we could. We made plans for what we could not. Dr. Keller wrote a new capacity assessment. Her conclusion was careful. Willa needed support with complex medical, financial, and legal decisions, but she could express stable preferences when given accessible communication, time, and choices she understood. I had entered the fight thinking the goal was to become Willa's guardian. By then, I understood that the goal was to reduce how much anyone needed to control. I asked for limited guardianship over health and safety decisions only, a supported decision-making agreement, an independent corporate trustee for the money, restoration of community services, and annual court review. I also sent the trust accounting, medication records, hospital documentation, and my grandmother's box to the county prosecutor through Elliot. The hearing was set for 6 weeks after Willa escaped Cottage 9. My parents arrived dressed, as if they were attending a wedding they disapproved of. Celeste sat with Damon Pierce. Frank sat 2 rows behind her by himself. I sat with Elliot. Teresa and Dr. Keller were nearby. Willa sat at a separate table with her court-appointed advocate and her tablet. Damon Pierce began with me. 19-year-old Brooke, Harlan had assaulted her father. Brooke had left Ashford. Brooke had stayed away 12 years. Brooke had not seen Willa's daily needs. Brooke changed jobs during litigation. Brooke had moved twice in 1 year. Then Pierce pointed to the trust and asked whether I stood to benefit from controlling Willa's residence. I answered, "That's why I'm asking for an independent trustee." Then he presented the rejected settlement. "My clients offered to place Willa with you immediately, correct?" "Yes." "And you refused?" "Yes." "Even though you claim your primary concern was removing her from my client's care?" "Yes." "Because you wanted a criminal investigation?" "No." I said, I refused because the offer required Willa's medical neglect and financial exploitation to be renamed a private disagreement. I wasn't willing to make her safety depend on our silence. So being vindicated mattered more than getting your sister home quickly. "I wanted her home immediately," I said. "I also know what happens in my family when harm is hidden. It repeats." Then Elliot called me to testify fully. I told the court about the cedar room. I described the dinner where I shoved my father and admitted I had lost control. I described leaving Willa behind. I described the returned packages and the reports that went nowhere. "I loved my sister," I said, "and I still failed her. Those facts can both be true. I don't think loving someone makes you automatically safe for them. My parents loved Willa in the way they knew how. My aunt believed she was protecting Willa from institutions. Fear can exist beside love. Control can exist beside love. That is why I'm not asking this court to trust my intentions. I'm asking for a structure that limits my power too." independent trustee, outside medical providers, community program, supported decisions, annual review, and Willa's communication device stays with her, not with whoever is caring for her. Then June's records enter the case. Born. Institutionalized. Died. Buried under a number. Then he read my grandmother's note about using the trust to give Willa people outside the family. Then Judge Sloan said, "I want to hear from Willa." Dr. Keller testified about the assessment process, consistency checks, comprehension testing, and the difference between supported communication and prompted answers. Willa moved to the witness table with her advocate beside her. The courtroom waited while she typed. Most adults rush silence because silence makes them anxious. My family had spent years filling Willa's silence with their own explanations. Willa pressed the blue button first. "Let me answer." Then she typed, "I want BROOKE house. I want live with BROOKE." The judge asked why. She asks me. Asks you what? Food, touch, door, doctor, lights. The judge asked, "Do you want Brooke to make every decision for you?" No. Help big things, I pick small things, some big too. The judge asked about Celeste. Willa pressed no. Work cottages. No tablet. Medicine, sleep. Door key outside. He asked whether Brooke had told her Celeste was bad. BROOK says people do bad things, not people bad. Pierce asked whether she understood Brooke had been gone for 12 years. Yes. Does that make you angry? Willa typed. Yes. It hurt. It also saved me. Because no coached witness says the person asking for custody abandoned her and made her angry. Do you still want to live with her? Yes. Willa looked at me for the first time since she had taken the table. She came back and now she listens. Judge Sloan recessed for 40 minutes. During the break, my mother approached me in the hallway. "You taught her to hate us," she said. "No, you're hearing her dislike something you did. That isn't the same thing." She never used to say these things. She never had a way to. She whispered, "We did what we thought was best." I know. I continued, and it hurt her. Is there any road back from this? Not one that starts with pretending. Then there is no road. She walked away. Judge Sloan returned and ruled from the bench. Celeste was removed as guardian and trustee. A regional trust company was appointed to manage Willa's funds and audit prior expenditures. My petition for limited guardianship over designated medical and safety matters was granted for 1 year, subject to review. The court ordered that no caregiver could restrict Willa's communication device except for immediate physical safety, and any such restriction had to be documented and reviewed. Then Judge Sloan addressed me directly. "Ms. Harlan, this order does not award you your sister. It gives you responsibilities around a person who retains rights of her own. Remember the difference." The gavel came down. Celeste stood, gathered her purse, and left without looking at anyone. Frank stayed behind. Willa moved into my duplex on a rainy Thursday. We carried in 2 suitcases, a box of weather books, her tablet, 6 containers of colored pencils, and a plastic model of the solar system missing Saturn. When she reached the small pantry beside the kitchen, she froze. I wanted to tear the door out. Instead, I asked, "Do you want it removed?" She looked at the tablet. "Let. Keep." I waited. Then she added, "No lock." So we kept the door. No lock. For the first few weeks, I made another mistake. I tried too hard. I asked Willa what she wanted for breakfast, what shirt she wanted, whether she wanted a shower now or later, whether she wanted music, whether the light was too bright, whether the chair was comfortable, whether she wanted to go out, stay in, call Teresa, watch weather videos, take a walk. Choice became another kind of noise. One morning, she slammed the tablet onto the table and covered her face. I stopped. She typed too many, so we built rhythms instead of constant questions. 2 breakfast options, not 12. A weekly board. A card she could use when she did not want to decide. A rule that closed bedroom doors meant knock and wait. A rule that nobody touched her tablet without asking. A rule that later was a complete answer. Willa began going to new roads 5 days a week. She liked the greenhouse program, hated ceramics, and developed a fierce preference for a local diner that served breakfast all day. The first time she told me to leave her alone, I went into the bathroom and cried with the faucet running because I was so happy she could. Then I realized celebrating someone's boundary, too, visibly, is a good way to make the boundary about yourself. So the next time she typed Gio away, I said, "Okay," and went away. I had spent years loving the little sister I remembered. Willa was not 8 anymore. She did not need me to rescue a frozen version of her from childhood. She needed me to meet the woman who had survived without me. Several expenditures from the trust were referred for financial exploitation charges. Celeste eventually accepted a plea that required restitution, probation, and a permanent prohibition on serving as a guardian, trustee, or fiduciary. My parents sold Harlan Garden and feed to a regional company and moved to North Carolina. The harder part of healing was June. Willa kept asking about the photograph. June like me. Maybe in some ways, I said. We can't know everything. Why hide? I had no clean answer. Shame, fear, bad advice, and a family trained to treat difference as something to conceal had all played a part. None of it brought June home. Elliot helped us locate the old institution cemetery, now part of state-owned land. She chose the inscription. June Harlan. 1940, 1959. Daughter, sister, remembered. Just Willa, me, Teresa, Dr. Keller, and unexpectedly Frank. Chosen family, I learned, does not mean replacing every relative with better people and pretending blood never mattered. Sometimes it means building a circle where access is based on safety, accountability, and respect instead of DNA. At June's grave, Willa placed a laminated card against the stone. She had designed it herself. It read, "We know your name." Then she tapped quick against the granite. I answered the same pattern beside her. For years, I thought that pattern meant I know you're there. Now I think it means something harder. I am willing to notice. Not fix. Not own. Not speak for. Notice. There is a difference. I wish I could tell you. I no longer feel guilty about the 12 years I stayed away. Willa still has panic attacks when locks click unexpectedly. She sleeps with a small lamp on. She sometimes hides food in her bedroom because deprivation taught her that access can disappear. She has nightmares she cannot describe. I still overreact when she does not answer her phone. I still have to stop myself from turning concern into surveillance. Then I sat in my car for 10 minutes and admitted to myself that control can grow from terror just as easily as cruelty. My parents controlled Willa because they were ashamed. I could control Willa because I was terrified of losing her again. Willa has her own phone with location sharing she can turn off. She has an advocate who is not me. She has private appointments with Dr. Keller. She has access to her own spending account. The trust company sends statements in an accessible format. At the annual review, Willa speaks before I do. Then the judge asked if she still wanted the guardianship arrangement. Willa answered, "For now." For now. I loved those words. My family had always treated decisions as permanent doors. Shut, locked, settled. Willa understood something better. A safe decision can be reviewed. A relationship can be evaluated. Permission can change. Love does not require permanent access. The store sign with my last name is gone from Alder Street. Some evenings, Willa sits in that pantry by choice because it is cool and dark, and the shelves make a protected space around her. She brings her headphones, her tablet, and a mug of tea. Willa looked up at me. Then she reached out and pulled the door almost closed. Almost. Not all the way. I asked, "Want me nearby?" She pressed a button. Yes. So I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the wall and read a book. No rescue. No speech. No dramatic promise. Just two adult sisters sharing a quiet house where the person inside the small room controlled the door. That is the life we have now. I used to believe betrayal was the moment someone chose money, reputation, or control over you. Now I think betrayal can be quieter. It can be the story everyone agrees to tell because the truth would make dinner uncomfortable. It can be a medical appointment canceled because questions are inconvenient. It can be calling obedience peace. It can be loving someone while refusing to know who they are. If this story made you think of someone whose voice has been ignored inside their own family, send it to the person who may need permission to trust what they see. Tell me in the comments what a healthy boundary has looked like in your life, and subscribe to After Silence Stories for more stories about what happens when silence stops protecting the wrong people. I'll meet you in the next episode.